Good afternoon, everybody. It's your Self-Chef crew back for another podcast. You got Patrick here,
Hello,
Doug,
everyone.
Derek,
Hey, good afternoon, all.
and we have got quite the subject for today. It's actually probably the longest podcast title that we've ever had, but it's a good one. Life will not be stress-free, mistake-free, anxiety-free, or fear-free. Learn to recognize what you are feeling and respond instead of react. And as we usually do, I'm going to go a little bit of old school, go back to the Stoics. I got a couple of quotes here. This one is from Epictetus. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. And another one that's a little bit more modern, but actually very, very good, from Viktor Frankl. Between stimulus and response, there is space. And that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. All right, so I'm going to kick it off and kind of set the stage from a personal perspective. We got quite a bit of content to cover here today. And that, like most of the things that we cover on the Self-Shift podcast, we all, three of us, and many, many more, I'm sure, have had personal experiences managing this type of thing in our day-to-day life, right? So, for example, for most of my life, I subscribe to the very unhealthy coping mechanisms of avoidance and repression. So I know that sounds bizarre saying that, but I firmly believed, in going back to my childhood, that push those emotions down, just repress them and they go away. Of course, that's not exactly what happens. They come back with the vengeance later. Or if you just avoid them, they'll go away as well, right? Again, that doesn't work either. So before we jump into, some of the material on this, I'm going to kick it over to Derek and get his perspective, and then Doug, and then we'll circle back around.
Yeah, I think there's two words in the title that are very key here: life and learn. And what I've realized and discovered on the journey is it's the journey of life is just one big learning experience through experience. And and I think studying some of the spiritual teachers and just paraphrasing, summarizing, life will give you what you need in every moment for what it is that you need to realize. And that's something that I think that I didn't learn a lot till my later years in life, heading into middle age. That life's going to give you the opportunity to rise, or it's going to give you the opportunity to fall, and you get to stand in the middle and learn which way to go based on the techniques and the skills that you train yourself in. I think it's a training. It's like everything else. You have to train yourself.
Doug?
Yeah, I think a key part of the theme here is, like, if you think you're going to be able to live a life where you can avoid stress, you can not make mistakes, you can avoid anxiety, you can avoid fear, like, you can't. I mean, when it comes to life, you are going to make mistakes, you are going to encounter stress. And so this theme's really powerful to me, and it was a big part of my learning journey when I realized a lot of my behaviors were grounded in trying to eliminate stress from my life. And so, as I went through career, as I went through daily things, as I went through family things, I would operate under this belief that I could take a job where I wouldn't be on call and I wouldn't have to resolve outages. I could protect my kids from ever experiencing a mistake, or keep them from being in social anxious situations or other things like that. And a big part of this one is realizing, like, you will not be able to eliminate those things from your life. And in fact, you shouldn't want to, because experiencing challenges and working through challenges and, going through that process of learning from a mistake, or learning how to deal with a challenge, or how to figure out options to take when you're facing a challenge, like, those are such a key part of it. So, I have some more to say, but, in terms of this little part here, I'll just say, like, a big awakening or realization for myself was, I falsely believe I can live a life where I can eliminate stress or eliminate mistakes. So I'll kick it back to you, Patrick.
No, I think that's great, Doug and Derek. And it's called the human condition, right? The human condition. And I'll add another thing on that. Life is not fair either, right? So learning to handle and deal with the challenges and stress and anxiety that Doug mentioned is what we're going to talk about today. And again, let's circle back to something we frequently go over, but I just want to cover it again. That our brains have evolved to keep us alive, not to make us happy. And therefore, emotions play a part in that, right? And so, learning to process, learning to feel those, learning to work through those is absolutely key, right? There's an old saying, especially with grief and pain, that they demand to be felt, they demand to be processed. And if you don't, eventually you're going to, right? So it's best to lean into it, learn how to surf these types of things, and basically learn how to experience the human condition in the most healthiest way that you can, right? And to kind of double click on what emotions are, right? And again, this is not a clinical podcast or anything like that, but emotions are natural and necessary for us as human beings, right? And we tend to think there's this myth or this thing about emotions that we should always be happy, and if our emotions don't have us in a happy place, that bad emotions or negative emotions are inherently bad. They're not inherently bad. They're there to help us and guide us and allow us to work through things and teach us, as Derek noted a little bit earlier. It's the key to learning how to recognize and respond, right? So, for example, as I mentioned earlier, for most of my life, I was a repressor and an avoider, right? In that order, actually. And when I started getting into my mindfulness practice and really understanding how I could become or improve myself, some of the learnings that I had, really allowed me to learn to lean into these emotions, right? Don't suppress, don't avoid, right? Mindfulness, we talk about a lot on this podcast, in the sense that recognizing as an emotion is happening and observing it, right? Don't fuse with it. You don't have to become the thought or the emotion, but recognize that it's happening. This is especially good when you sense like you're getting angry or you're getting, historically had a tendency, if I felt like I was being disrespected or not heard or whatever, or people didn't understand what I was saying, shut down, right? But observing that is happening allows me to start processing it, come back to a state of, balance or whatever, and work through that. So, and one of the things that I like to do, or as it's called RAIN, actually, it comes from the acceptance and commitment therapy, is really a 4-step process that basically allows me, whenever I feel like an emotion's coming, I've got myself trained so that I don't try to suppress or avoid. I recognize that it's happening, right? Some emotion, some thought is happening, and I need to be able to process it. Now allow it to happen or accept it, right? Don't try to avoid it. Don't try to repress it. Allow it to happen. Then investigate it, especially with curiosity. What do I feel? Where is this coming from, right? Just really explore it. And then recognize again that I am not my thought or emotion, right? I'm observing them. So, and once you start learning to do that practice, it really helps when you start sensing emotions to come on, and that type of thing. And I'll give you another example, and I may have mentioned this previously, is that given my long history of suppression and avoidance, even to this day, it doesn't happen very often anymore since I've been doing my mindfulness practice and learning to use these techniques such as RAIN, is that emotions that I didn't process 25 years ago will surface, right? Very, I don't know what the right term is, strongly, right? And now allow them to come and just feel them, use the RAIN technique and just work through that. And after even just a couple of minutes, right, things that have been repressed way down came up or processed, and I'm able to let them go. So that's really, really a key thing. Another thing that I found is really, and we talked about non-identification, is some of the concepts of cognitive diffusion, right? And there's some really simple ones that I've learned to use, like when you feel like an emotion's coming on, you're getting anxious or whatever, is to basically take some really simple techniques to recognize that. So, for example, just labeling a thought. Like, for example, I use the technique of I'm having the thought that I am anxious, or I'm having the thought that I am nervous, or whatever, and just dealing with it that way helps me to frame it up from an observable pattern, right? Um, this actually happened to me earlier today. I was getting ready to do a presentation, and there were people that were going in front of me, and for some reason I was starting to get anxious. It was not my usual time to give a presentation. It was a little bit different, and some of the crowd was a little bit different than I normally give to, and I started getting some um, sense of anxiety that I was going to make a mistake, right? And Doug, you mentioned that a second ago. So I'm going to hit on two key points: is that I was starting to have the voice in my head describe what would happen if you walked up there and you didn't have your notes or whatever, or you started rambling or whatever the case may be. And as I was doing this, the person that went before me, and I thought I was going to be judged. Oh my gosh, this is going to be bad. People are going to throw rocks at my car or whatever. The person in front of me started reading the wrong material and recognized it, right? And kind of gave a little laugh, and the audience kind of gave a little laugh, and he went on, right? So that was a way of recognizing, oh, wait a minute, embracing mistakes. This guy embraced his mistake right there on the spot, adjusted, and everybody was smiling, laughing. It wasn't any really big deal. And Doug, you mentioned earlier, like the ability to really embrace mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. It's part of life. It's part of the human experience. That really solidified it or really was a good example today of, hey, it's not the end of the world if you screw something up, right? It's called being human. So anyway, I know that was a bit of a ramble there, but I wanted to, this topic is so near and dear to my heart that I wanted to share a couple of that. So Derek, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that connecting an example of this that everybody can resonate that's listening to this is think about like what happens when you lose your car keys or lose your wallet or you misplace them. Like what's that instantaneous feeling that happens? And typically it's like, oh no, it's like sheer panic, fear, immediately all these thoughts start running through your head about I'm not going to be able to get to my meeting on time or to my next appointment on time, or somebody's got my wallet, they're going to take all my credit card. I mean, it's just a sheer panic and fear that sets in. And so, it all happens to us. We all lose something, or we all have a moment where something unfortunate is happening. But being able to shift yourself, and I think that's part of like the platform we're building here, self-shift, being able to shift yourself to a state of remaining calm and present to the moment will allow you to actually end up thinking clearly to find out where exactly are your keys, or where exactly is your wallet, where'd you place it last. And that's what I found on the journey of, going through hard times and challenges, even professionally and personally, is being able to become so aware in a moment of what is, and just taking a step back, taking a breath, taking a few deep breaths and realizing it's not the end of the world. I'm still alive. I'm still breathing, and it's all going to be okay. And I think that is something that it would be just as very simple for everybody to resonate with. Just take a pause for a moment and take a breath, because you're not dead. You're still breathing, and get yourself in a state where you can maintain a clear mind, processing that emotion, letting it just flow through you to where you can get yourself back in that state of calmness is very key.
Yep, well said.
Yep, well said. Doug?
Yeah, so I guess just along my learning journey, I think I've shared in the past that I had a certain period of work life where I was really unhappy, and I started to try to look into what does it mean to be happy, and learned about different things. And kind of during COVID, in a similar mindset, I was like, I think I spend too much time worrying about stress, worrying about avoiding it, and all those kind of things. So I found a book called The Upside of Stress, and I was like, oh, that sounds like an oxymoron, or that sounds paradoxical. So it's by Kelly McGonigal. She's a Stanford psychologist, and there's actually a TED Talk out there that she gave like 10 years ago that has like 15 million views where she talks about this. But it was a huge moment in my learning journey in terms of realizing how I was viewing stress, because so she talks about how there was this big study they did about the impact of stress on people's lives. And so they did this survey of 30,000 adults over 8 years, and they asked them, like, year to year, how much stress did you experience in the last year? Like, was it low, medium, high, and those kind of things? And it asked the second question, which is, do you believe that stress harms your health? And the big finding from it was that, and I'm looking at the numbers here, but they found that people who experienced high stress had a 43% increased risk of dying. But that's not the big point. The people that viewed stress as harmful to your health were the ones that saw that 43% increase. The people that viewed stress as part of life and, viewed it actually as a tool for understanding what's going on and, recognizing times when you're responding to a situation and processing it, 0% of those people experienced, or died. So it was really like the way you viewed stress was the key indicator. And again, in my own personal experience, similar to Patrick, we were going to be presenting to the board. And I was really, really nervous because, looking back, I realized bored people are just bored people. But, these huge people, I'm giving this thing. And in part of her book, she talked about like, yeah, your heart starts to race, you feel this anxiousness, but like if you turn around and think about it differently and say, there's a reason they want me to come present. It's because I'm knowledgeable of this subject and they want to know what I have to share with them, right? And so instead of viewing that as like nervousness or anxiousness, I viewed it as I'm excited to share. And I think I probably, you can ask the board, but I think I gave probably the best presentation of my life because I just came in viewing it differently. I viewed the situation differently and I approached it differently. And ever since then, I've had a different attitude towards stress as far as like, and again, it goes back to mindfulness, recognize what's going on, realize you're feeling something,
Yep.
and take the opportunity to kind of reframe it and think about it differently. So that's what I would share.
That's a really, really good example. And it's kind of like, in some of the examples that we gave today is that your amygdala, I think they call it the amygdala hijack, is when you immediately have the fight or flight response. And the more you are able to, the more you get into mindfulness and meditation, the more you're able to basically negate that, right? And you both said a couple of things, like you said, pause and breathe, Derek, and some of the things that you just said, Doug. I'm going to go back to that example that I had this morning because it ties a lot of this stuff together, in the sense that as I was sitting there, I could sense that my which is not natural for me because this is a familiar setting, but a little bit of a different crowd, is that my anxiety level, I could sense energy going up. I actually looked at my smartwatch and I saw that my heart rate was well above normal, right? So I did some pause and breathe, right? Breathe in 4, hold 4, exhale for 8 seconds, right? Which to get things start self-regulating myself. Also the cognitive diffusion that we talked about earlier, like labeling your thoughts, or there's a lot of different techniques for this. So just Google or whatever, cognitive diffusion folks. My technique is to say, I'm having the thought that, so that I put it from an observational perspective. The other thing that I threw in there was a little bit of self-talk, like Doug just said. And I basically told myself, dude, you've done this every week for years, right? You can do this. And so just, hey, even if you, it's fine. It might be a different crowd, but you've done this many, many times. And then also giving myself the extra kick of, if you make a mistake, it's not the end of the world, because you've got self-compassion, right? You've got to recognize that you are going to make mistakes, that everyone makes mistakes. As a matter of fact, if you're not making mistakes, you're not even living, right? I would go so far as to even say that. So anyway, I don't know if the universe must have been working with me this morning to come up with such a good example for our podcast today. So we've talked about rain. We've talked about different techniques and how we've done for this in the past. Just the other thing that I really want to hit on. I know we're getting close on time here. Is I'm going to start with a quote by John Kabat-Zinn, right, the famous psychiatrist that was a proponent of going back to the 70s of mindfulness, kind of brought that to the West or to the U.S. A quote from him, and then explain how this can lead into practical advice day to day. You can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf, right? And we've all stated very clearly here today, life is stressful. You're supposed to feel stressed. It's called being human. That's how you get motivated. That's how you know how to react. Anxiety has an evolutionary place because if you're anxious, you're going to take some action. Um, and all of these things have a useful meaning in our psyche, in the human experience. But you could also learn, since we don't live in caves and we're very seldom chased by lions and tigers and bears and stuff like that anymore, maybe occasionally it happens, um, as that these emotions can be a little bit misplaced, and you've got to deal with those. And I think that's where that quote really comes into play, because if you learn that the waves are going to come, the emotions are going to come, that's part of being human, but there are ways to deal with it. You can surf it, lean into it, don't avoid it, don't repress it, lean into it, use the rain method that we talked about earlier, or some of the others, labeling thoughts. There are different, silly voice is another one. It really never worked for me, but you can use a silly voice to kind of sing, oh, I'm having this thought, or, whatever. I'm sorry for that really poor singing there, guys. But those are key things, is learning that, hey, waves are going to come. They come to all of us. And sometimes they're really, really big waves. And sometimes they might knock you off your surfboard. But if you learn these techniques and you put them in practice, then you'll typically have a better sense of self-regulation, and learning, like as Doug noted earlier, that stress is stress. And those that accept that stress is part of life and learn to deal with it, I don't remember exactly what the metrics Doug said, but they tend to fare much, much better from an even living perspective. So anyway, that was some big statements there, guys. So I know we're getting close on time. Let's start heading out with some parting thoughts. Doug.
Yeah. By the way, you stole my closer. I was sitting on that John Kabat-Zinn quote as well, because it's so true. Like, the ocean's huge, tidal waves are huge. Like, the moon stuff, you can't control the way, you can't stop waves. So you just have to learn to surf. But I will pivot a little bit to another quote, and the gentleman is E. Joseph Cosman. But if you want to test your memory, try to recall what you were worrying about 1 year ago. Right. And so, like, one of the things I try to do is if I'm telling myself this story in my head, I'm going through the negative self-talk, I'm catastrophizing and all those things, I try to step back and say, hey, will this matter in 10 minutes? Will it matter in an hour, a day, a week, a month, a year? And, at the end of the day, a year from now, when I look back, will I even remember I was stressing about this thing? I may remember there was this thing I was worried about, but I'll probably think more about what I learned between now and then, or how it played out, or those other things. So again, like, the impact of stress, when you view it negatively and you spend a lot of time focusing on it and, worrying about how do I eliminate it or avoid it, like, that's more impactful than kind of embracing it, looking at it from a different point of view and saying, okay, this is a positive opportunity for growth. I'm the right guy to be here sharing this information, all those kind of things. And one other quick thought I'll say is, like, Patrick, your example, another part of what you were experiencing was the spotlight effect, where you think everyone's really focused on you. But a lot of those audience members or, other people, they're distracted. They're worrying about things, and so they're not, that you made a mistake because you prepared and you were working through it and all those kind of things, but they won't know. So anyways, couple parting thoughts from me.
No, that's really good. No, that's really good. You forgot one parting thought.
Be kind to yourself.
Excellent. Derek.
I think I'll just wrap up with this, sticking to the wave in the ocean and that example. Rip currents are a powerful force in the ocean, and they always tell you, if you're caught in a rip current, don't fight it. Don't try and get out of it immediately. Learn to swim parallel to the shoreline, and you'll eventually get out of the rip current. So, and of course, that comes with being able to resolve the fear and the panic that sets in immediately when you realize you're being pulled out to sea. So I'll just share that, as you encounter life and the rip currents of life, just learn how to swim with it. Swim with it. Don't fight it. Don't let it pull you under. Swim with it until you can get to a spot where you can actually get out onto the shoreline. And so I'll encourage you in your life just to, set with whatever is challenging, whatever is hard, recognize what the emotion is, and just let it marinate and swim with it, let it be, and just practice these techniques we've talked about, and you'll be able to rise up above it and get yourself into a space of positivity and being able to move forward.
Well said. Well said, both of you. And we probably should have maybe said this at the beginning, but before I read my last quote here is keep in mind that a reaction is an automatic, an automatic whatever, either anger or something that you may regret later. It's, it's not thought out, right? Whereas a response is something where you observed what's happening. It is a thoughtful, response. So keep that in mind. And in the words of Stephen Covey, we cannot always choose what happens to us. We can choose how we respond. Alrighty, I think we're going to wrap this one for today, but I can't let this go without, Walt Whitman's quote, made famous by Ted Lasso, of course, is be curious, not judgmental. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Awesome. Bye, everyone.
All right, it's done.
Yeah, it was a great one.
Yeah, we were flowing pretty good there. Yeah.
So we have a bunch in the can.